Okay, so let's go and set up the properties for our remaining IDs here. And I'm going to start off with our menu ID selector. Let's see here. I'm going to start off with, you know what I'm going to do here actually is I want a background color on this guy and I want a border as well. So I'm actually going to swipe the background and the border from the previous ID selector, the header ID. So just go ahead and grab the same background and the same border there if you're following along here. Make sure to grab the semicolon on the end as well. And all I'm going to do is just copy and paste that down into the menu there. And let's see here. Well, if you want, you can save that up and go and check out your browser. There we go, something like that. But obviously, our menu is stretching right across our layout, and I want a vertical menu going down the left-hand side. So what we will do is we will set a width on this guy, a width of 150 pixels. Now, I think what I'm going to wind up doing is I'm going to explain. I've already figured out all of my math, all the numbers that I'm going to be using for our layout. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hammer them all into the layout and we'll build it together. And then in the next exercise, maybe what I'll do is I'll take some time and explain exactly how I arrived at, how did I know to use 150 pixels for the width of the menu, for example, right? So I'll explain all that. All right, so that's cool. That's looking good. I'm just going to flip back over to the code here. What else do we want to do to this guy? Well, let's see here. As you can see, the height of the menu is being determined by the content inside the div, right? So the text that I had inserted there, reading menu. So again, I think what I'll do, and this could be temporary, this could be permanent, I'm not really sure yet, but I'm going to throw in a height of 300 pixels, save that up and refresh, and now I have something like this. Okay, that's great. The only problem that I'm seeing here is that the main content that we have here is residing below the menu, and I want the main content up over here. I want it to fill in this white space here. So, skill testing question. You've seen a lot during our time together. You've seen clears, and you've seen floats, and you've seen minimum heights, and you've seen compound selectors, and all the rest of it. Any ideas? How should I get this content here to wrap up around the side of the menu? Now, think back to all the way back to chapter 1 when we had that graphic. And I think I said something like, you know, I get asked all the time or I get asked on a regular basis how to wrap text around a graphic. Do you remember how we did that? Well, here's what I'm going to do. I hope you're thinking what I'm thinking. I'm going to go back into my code. I'm going to look for my menu ID selector. What I'm going to do with this guy is I'm simply going to add on a float property. Float left. There, something like that. Save, refresh, boom. Now our text is sitting up on the same line, if you will, as the menu. And this is exactly the same as, remember, again, we had that cartoon robot, that orange droid.png, and the text was wrapping alongside him, and I think it was wrapping underneath him as well. This is exactly the same concept. So, except now, obviously, we're working with a layout. So this container, which in the previous, back in chapter 1, was a graphic. This container now happens to be a div. Same concept, though. And now the content that resides below the menu container, namely this stuff, right? Even the footer, you can see the footer there, is now all wrapping up beside the menu. That's what the float is doing, right? Okay, cool. Now, you might be sitting there going, well, if this menu is now floating, why is it not floating over here? Why is it not touching the edge of the browser window like the graphic did way back in chapter 1? I shall explain that in just a moment. Let me just throw in a couple of other properties for our other ID selectors, and then I'll explain why that's happening. Okay, but I hope this is working for you here. Let's go back to our code. We now have our content ID selector. Let's throw in some properties for this guy. I'm going to take that background color and the border, and I'm going to paste him into the, paste those guys anyway into the ID selector there, the content ID selector. If you want to go and check that out, that's what it looks like now, right? It's getting there. It's not perfect, but it's getting there. What else should we do here? Well, maybe what I'll do, just thinking about this here. Maybe what I'll do is I will set a height on this guy as well. Again, I'm not sure if this is going to be permanent or not, but now we wind up with something like this. Okay, we're getting there, looking all right. The footer now is shoved all the way down below the menu and the content area, which is wonderful. But you know what I want to do, though, is I want to create a gap of space between the menu and my content, a little gap of white space right in there. So what I'm going to do inside my code is I'm going to add on margin left, something like this. And I'm going to use a margin left of 5 pixels. And that doesn't really do anything, right? Which is kind of weird, kind of bizarre. Let me show you what's up here. Okay, try this. I'm going to throw in a couple more properties here. I'm going to throw in, this is going to be kind of weird, but I'm going to throw in a float of left. Oh, hang on. I did a full colon instead of a semicolon. Okay. Now suddenly we're getting farther away from what we wanted. All right, now I want you to understand what happened here, though. We floated this fella, didn't we? And we floated him to the left. Now, remember that a floating something, takes it out of the normal flow of the document, and what happens then is stuff that is not floating, namely the footer, now resides above that guy because this guy is out of the normal flow of the document, right? So what I'm going to do here to try and repair the damage that I just did here is I'm going to throw a width onto this guy, a width of 801 pixels, which seems kind of bizarre, doesn't it? Well, we'll talk about that in due time. All right, this is exactly what we wanted here. So throwing on the float left and setting a width repaired the damage and got our layout looking almost exactly the way we want. We now have that gap of space between the menu and the content, which is awesome. And everything else is looking hunky-dory here, which is great. All right, now let's throw in, actually, you know what? I was going to do the footer, but I want to explain something else first before we do the footer. I want to answer the question, how come the menu and the content divs, which are both floating, right? They both have float values of left. Why aren't they sitting out over here? Why aren't they touching the edge of the browser window like the other examples that we've seen? Well, it's because the entire layout that we have here is sitting inside a div called master. So master is the sort of the outermost container for the entire layout that we have. So what you need to remember is that when you're floating objects, they're going to float to the extreme left or the extreme right of the container that they sit inside, right? Now, in those earlier examples, the outermost container was the browser window itself, right? In this example, the outermost container for the layout is the master. In other words, the parent container for my floating object, my menu, is master, right? So you could also say that the parent container for the master is the browser window. Does that make sense? Think parent-child. So the child of the direct descendant of the browser window is master. The direct descendant for master is everything that sits inside it. Header, menu, content, and footer, right? What I could do at this point is I could add in additional nested divs or child elements inside menu, inside the container, the content container as well, right? That's how it works. If you're sitting there kind of scratching your head going, what the heck is Geoff talking about? What you might want to do is you may want to throw on a background for the master just so you can see exactly where it is. There I go with my full colons again. Something like this, right? Now you can't see the red towards the top there because the header container sits right up in the top left and right corners there. He's tucked right up in there, but you can see the red sort of in all the gaps of space, right? So that's the red area is the master div, the parent div for the menu and for the content there. So that's why these guys sit on the extreme left edge of the master div, not the extreme left edge of the browser window. The other cool thing to note as well is that the menu and the content div here are both floating to the left with a gap of 5 pixels. So I didn't need to crank up the margin left value for the content to shove him way over. All I needed to do was just float him as well. So both these guys are floating to the left and a little gap of space. Just like our image gallery. It's the same idea, except we only have 2 divs now and they're different sizes, but it's the same concept anyway. All right. Through my relentless babbling, I hope you have the idea here. I'm just going to get rid of the background color on the master. Let's go and do our footer real quick here. The first thing that I want to do with this guy is I want to clear him. I want to clear both. I want to make sure that the footer is always going to reside on a separate line or on a new line. Let's use the same background color and border color that we've been using all the way along here, just for consistency. What else here? Let's throw on a quick height. You can leave them if you want. You don't have to do a height, but I'm going to throw in a quick height, just like that. Okay, refresh. Boom. Okay, great. Awesome. The only touch-up that I want to make here is the footer is, again, rubbing right up against the bottom edge of my layout. I want a gap of space in there, so I'll just fix this real quick by throwing in margin bottom for my content ID. And I'll use 5 pixels. How does that sound? Bang. There it is. Beautiful. Awesome. I hope you like it. There you go. There's how to build a fixed width layout. And again, what's going to happen here is when I scale my browser window, yeah, the layout is going to remain centered inside that browser window. But if I make my browser window too small, the layout containers, the layout blocks that you and I have created will not collapse. They will always remain at 100 and, what did we use there? 150 pixels and 801 pixels, always, right? That's the deal there. That's how it works. Okay, cool. I hope you like that. Now you know how to build a fixed width layout. Now, what I want to do in the next exercise is I want to explain how I arrived at all of my numbers, 801. And I also want to throw a couple of other ideas off you, so let's check that stuff out.